from a viewer who writes in and asks why the Society of St. Pius X uses the 1962 Missal and not the older Missal. He asks if the SSPX ever used the older Missal, or have they always used the 1962 Missal?
I don't know the whole story, I'm sure, but what I do know, I think, is relevant to the question, and that has to do with a certain history of the Society of St. Pius X. When I arrived at Acon, I was told that the English-speaking provinces of the Society of St. Pius X used the pre-John the 23rd Missal, and that the non-English-speaking parts, especially the French areas, used the early changes of 60 and 62, and that this was actually explicitly agreed upon. I was told that the leadership of the society at that point, ultimately Archbishop Lefebvre, had agreed that in the English-speaking world that the priests would use the pre-John the 23rd liturgy. That endured all the way to 1982. So, in fact, I can say this, that the English-speaking priests in England, in the United States of America, all used, and Canada, as far as I know, all used the pre-John the 23rd. John the 23rd came in 1958, as you know. So it was the pre-John the 23rd liturgy. It was actually the pre-1955-54, even, with the changes that were wrought in the Holy Week ceremonies, especially the Sacred Triduum, under Pius XII. We used the old traditional Holy Week ceremonies prior to the so-called reform then of the Holy Week ceremonies. Now, that changed rather abruptly when in 1982 Archbishop Lefebvre came to the States and told us that we had to use the early changes of John the 23rd in the breviary. Changes that wouldn't really have affected the lay people, changes that they might not have even been aware of had they not, learned about it as someone told them. Because the lay people generally don't pray the breviary, and they certainly don't pray the breviary with the priests and seminarians of the Society of St. Pius X. But we were told that we had to switch from the pre-John the 23rd breviary, and we had to accept the early changes in the praying of the breviary. And I spoke with Archbishop Lefebvre about this, and I said, Monsignor, the next logical step is going to be require that we take the 1962 changes of John the 23rd, because the Divine Office and the Mass should coincide. They should be harmonized with each other. So, this will leave us adopting the John the 23rd changes in the breviary, but not the changes in the Mass. And he said, no, just the Divine Office for the time being. And that's as far as he would go. Well, sure enough, within the year, Monsignor Lefebvre returned and said, now I need you to accept the 1962 changes in the Mass also. At least I need you to accept those changes in the seminary. He said, you don't have to introduce those changes in the missions. And the reason we understood why we would have to accept those changes in the seminary but not in the missions is because in the missions people would notice the changes and they'd be very alarmed by them. Whereas in the seminary, the seminarians were going to be trained in the 1962 changes, so when they were ordained they were accustomed to using the 1962 changes, and that would be the norm for them from that time on. So the process actually was one of gradually changing the Society of St. Pius X. Actually, as I say, there was even a division initially when I first arrived at Acon in the early 70s, because the European, I would say the continental European priests, the clergy, used the early changes in the breviary, and in England and in the United States of America we did not. And when we asked Monsignor Lefebvre back in 1982, well, why are we making these changes to the Divine Office? And he said, so that when the priests come from Europe to America, when the American priests go to Europe, they don't find that difference, that kind of a dichotomy between the two. And it had not, as far as I know, been a problem before, so we were surprised why it was becoming an issue. We didn't know. But we found out later that the real reason for these changes was that Monsignor Lefebvre was involved in negotiations with the Vatican, with the modernists in the Vatican, There were 3 cardinals who had been appointed to meet with Archbishop Lefebvre and try to work out some kind of an arrangement, which ultimately was called a protocol, so that the modernists in the Vatican could recognize the Society of St. Pius X. St. Pius X Society would recognize the legitimacy of the modernists in the Vatican. Among the terms of that rapprochement between the two was that the society accept the early changes of John the 23rd, I guess as a token of goodwill or something, and acknowledge that these things are perfectly legitimate. In any case, you know how that ended. That ended about 5 years later with Monsignor Lefebvre actually realizing that he had been dealt with dishonestly by the modernists in the Vatican, which is exactly what you'd expect. That they had agreed that they would approve Archbishop Lefebvre consecrating a bishop for the Society of St. Pius X. And then when after the protocol was agreed upon and signed, and practically before the ink was dried, they showed that they had no intention of having Archbishop Lefebvre consecrate a bishop for the society at that time. And he realized that the whole thing had been an effort to kind of string things along. Monsignor Lefebvre, within 3 years of that, was dead of cancer, God rest his soul. Perhaps they knew that he was ill. Perhaps they were just waiting for him to die. I think something Archbishop Lefebvre subsequently said indicated that that's how he read their actions and their real intentions. But that's how the Society of St. Pius X came to universally adopt the 1962 changes. That the 1962 changes, the early changes of 60 and 62, were not initially part of the formula that we were all bound to in the society. They came to be adopted and imposed in the process of this effort to work out some kind of an arrangement, a protocol, and a deal with the modernists in the Vatican. Mm-hmm. Did Archbishop Lefebvre ever reverse it? No, he never did. By that time, people who opposed it had been shown the door in the society, and I think all the clergy in the society had accepted the 1962 changes. So I don't know that Monsignor Lefebvre saw an enormous problem with the 1962 changes. I believe he saw some problem with them. But remember, Vatican II had not yet met. The first document of the Council, Sacrosanctum Concilium, had not yet appeared regarding the liturgy. Certainly, when the Vatican Council met and talked about the liturgy, Monsignor Lefebvre certainly saw there were problems at that point.